folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to get started right now. Thanks for being patient. Always want to wait a couple of minutes before we get started. Welcome to another Sense and Respond Press webinar celebrating the publication of our latest book, The Culture Project. In fact, we did one of these yesterday and with Ala Weinberg for her new book called The Culture of Safety. So lots of culture-related webinars this week. Today, we are going to talk about another book that we just recently shipped. It's a book called The Culture Project, and our author is here, Tom Bradbury. Tom, go ahead and reveal yourself to the people. And Tom has kindly brought along with him a colleague who's going to share the stage with him tonight and help us in our conversation about the Culture Project and about how to use talent and technology to succeed in a post-pandemic world, which I certainly hope we are moving towards at an increasing pace. It feels like that here. It feels like that here in Spain. Everything seems to be, the numbers are heading in the right direction, despite us really not having any vaccines here in Europe. But things seem to be heading in a good direction as the weather gets better. So that's great. Bryan Berthold is Tom's colleague who will be joining us as well. We'll introduce everybody in just a second. Let's get into the some of the housekeeping very, very quickly. So yes, we're recording this webinar. So the video of this will be up on our YouTube channel in the next, probably early next week, realistically. The reality is that my daughter does my video editing for me for these, and usually the weekends are when she does the work. So that'll be great. We're going to have a Q&A session. Bryan and Tom and I are going to have a discussion for the first 30 minutes or so, and then we'll do a Q&A. So if you have any questions as they come along, please put them in the Q&A box. Zoom has a chat feature and a Q&A feature in these webinars. The chat would be great for any feedback, anything you want to say, obviously. The Q&A box for questions you want me to pose specifically to Tom and to Bryan. As you can see, there's a hand-raising function as well. Hand-raising is great. I appreciate that, Guy. Let me finish getting through the intro, and then any questions that you have, again, if they're technical questions or whatever it is, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll get back to you in just a second. Obviously, if they're a question for Bryan and Tom, please do put them in the Q&A box. Tom is doing a book giveaway. We're going to give away a few books, plus a one-on-one session with Tom. Stick around till the end, and we're going to choose a winner right after the webinar, winners for that right after the webinar as well. It is an interactive webinar, so we're going to do some polling. We might have some discussions. You can always put your comments and your feedback in the chat as well. And again, Q&A up in the Q&A box. And if I do see a question in the chat box, I may just ask you to move it over there because keeping everything in one place makes things easier. Let's meet our panelists and our authors. First, we got Tom. Tom is the author of The Culture Project, our brand new book. Tom, say hello to folks. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here with us today. Tom Bradbury, author of The Culture Project and CEO of Helix 2, a consultancy focused on using the lens of talent and technology to improve culture within an organization.
Excellent, excellent. And Tom, you've brought along Bryan Berthold. Bryan, tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Bryan Berthold. I'm the Global Lead of Workplace Experience at Cushman and Wakefield. I'm actually a licensed architect, and I've spent many years on the client side and been the last 6 years with Cushman and Wakefield, trying to work globally to help our clients build compelling experiences for their employees.
Excellent. I'm glad you're here. And I'm Jeff Gothelf. I'm the co-founder of Sense and Respond Press, the publishing house for the Culture Project. Co-founded that with Josh Seiden. The Culture Project is one of several of the most recent publications from Sense and Respond Press. These are the 5 most recent books that we've published. We've now done webinars now with the Culture Project for all of them. So if you're interested in these topics and you want to hear a bit about any of them, the Sense and Respond YouTube channel has those webinars on there. We've got hiring product managers from Kate Lito was the most recent one before yesterday's with Ala. OKRs at the center. OKR is a very popular topic. Ethical product development, very timely topic right now. A Culture of Safety, we talked about yesterday, and The Culture Project today. These books are short, they're practical, they're tactical, and if you're busy, I have to tell you that when we're doing customer research for these books, every time I put one of these books in someone's hand, they look at it, they flip through them, because as you'll see, I've got one right here, they're not terribly thick, right? They're relatively short, and someone always says, they're like, oh, I might actually read this because it's, it's like 100 pages or less. So, which is great. Tom's book that we're going to cover today just came out. It's available anywhere that you buy books online. It's called The Culture Project, and we're going to dive right into it right now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we are going to get into this conversation. So as we jump into this, we'll start initially with Tom. Now, Tom, what was the driver for writing this book? Let's start with that. So, The Culture Project, it's a book that it's a day-by-day guide for a month's worth of activities to assess your company culture and to fix it, if you will. What was the driver for writing the book?
Yeah, Jeff. So I'm an entrepreneur. I've been supporting myself and my family with, I'm on my third company now, since I'm 26 years old. A bulk of that career, I owned a business, Labrador Technology. And what we did was we would chair tech initiatives as part of workplace transformation projects, mostly linked to the real estate industry, i.e. Companies relocating, they're renovating. And these projects were, huge investments for the clients that we work for. We're talking PepsiCo, some of the biggest global brands, Bridgewater, BNP Paribas, AllianceBernstein, as well as small and mid-sized firms who needed the help chairing the initiative. And as I was part of these teams, along with architects and engineers and project managers, and with these firms investing so much money in what should have been transformational and strategic activity, I noticed that the tech component of the project was treated way too tactically, right? Where they would be sending over, mid-level IT people to understand how to react to the built environment, right? Rather than being strategic. And I really would see at some of them, at some of these clients, just the opportunity lost building out a $100 million workplace project and not gaining true alignment between what might be a global tech roadmap and a big, expensive design and construction project. And they weren't asking themselves, if this is who we want to hire down the road, how should we equip or create an experience within the workplace, right, that matches a plan to attract the talent we want to, keep evolving towards. So that was real, noticing that it really kind of dug up my entrepreneurial spirit to help, fix that, approach it. And, a driver, that being the primary driver. And once I started to dig in, I would see what was holding companies back from that, which was these silos or specific domains that were led by expert professionals in HR, IT, real estate, finance, but just the construct of a corporation or organization really didn't allow for like a holistic plan to be laid over that. And that was my challenge, to try to figure out how I can create some, more partnership between those silos to have that holistic, ROI from this big investment.
Fascinating. And so the book, I've read the book many times.
Yes, you have.
The book gives you a very specific step-by-step guide to really try to uncover some of the root causes here. What was interesting was that you broke it down into kind of these 30 days of activities, right? What did you discover along the way as you were trying to carve out sort of, this is a daily act, this is a one-day activity, like breaking activities down to single-day activities, not an easy thing to do. What did you discover along the way as you were writing and trying to chop up this? Look, culture realignment, reinvention is a massive process. how do you chop it up into 30 days? What did you figure out along the way?
So, well, what I figured out as we wrote the book, and you and I and Josh and my friend Mark, who advised me in the book, really helped see the 30-day approach to it. Really, what I had to do was help leadership get involved. I had to establish a process that would give leadership credible evidence that they need to not just endorse a project, they need to understand the fundamental issues or flaws within their organization, culturally, that need to be addressed in order to let talent and technology thrive within their culture. So along the way, and once we got to kind of, if you recall, I had this meet and we talked about how do we deliver this effectively to a busy executive. The book is narrated toward where I'm speaking to a leader, where we want to get them involved in the weeds for a finite amount of time. They can't live in the weeds. They can't spend too much time in the weeds. But in the weeds, they would quickly see the fundamental issues that need to be addressed by kind of tweaking the culture and throughout the ranks between them and the weeds that would help drive bigger and better results for the organization.
And look, it was interesting too, because one of the things that we talked about a lot as we were editing the book and moving forward was like, is the expectation that somebody reads this book and then just goes, okay, today's day 1, tomorrow's day 2, the next day's day 3. And the realization I think that we reached was like, these are 30 days. If you can do this in 30 consecutive days, more power to you. But realistically, these are 30 days that you will get done over some period of time, right?
Yep. I think it can be constructive for the right type of leader who needs some structure to keep them involved in this important project, where maybe they would be more literal. But I think for many leaders, getting them involved in leveraging experts like Bryan and myself to kind of carry them through, let's say, day 26 on, but we get them for the first 5 days, and I mean that figuratively, of the type of activities that give them the drive to say, let's go fix this stuff. Bryan, Tom, let's go help me make adjustments to the organization. You have me and my horsepower behind this initiative.
Got it. I actually think right now there's a lot of consternation around how we returning to the office. And we kind of have, while there's a lot of tactics going on and keeping the business going and everyone safe, there is this kind of strategic pause around a great opportunity this year for people to go through this in 30 days, because you've got a captive audience. And if you block the time out, probably can get this done faster than I would say if there was no pandemic. So I think it's a great time for leaders to step up and say, hey, our culture's been hit, it's been whacked. We're going to be coming out of this, but why don't we level set it now versus going back to what we once had?
That's a great point, Bryan. A mutual acquaintance of Bryan and I told me that this pandemic has offered executives the urgency to move ineffective policies and sometimes people, right, to the side in order to get to the root cause of the problem. And I think that is in complete lockstep with my book, right? We have to push some legacy policy aside to understand, with some urgency, to understand how to best move forward for the organization.
And look, and this is really interesting, and this is like it again. It kind of feeling like, again, I don't want to get too optimistic. I don't like to say that out loud, but it feels like we're turning a corner. It feels like there's a light at the end of this pandemic tunnel, and so as this is the time, right? This is the opportunity to really rethink. Well, what are we going to go back to, and what are we not going to go back to? Because we don't have to go back 100% to the way it was. We've learned a lot of new things very, very quickly in the last couple of years, last year or so. It feels like a decade. At least. Let's get specific, Tom, though, Tom and Bryan. So Tom first, and then Bryan, I'd love for you to weigh in on this. So we talk about the culture project. Now, the word culture, like the word strategy, if you look it up, it has 1,000 different definitions. So when you say culture, especially part of the phrase, the culture project, Tom, what do you mean? And I know that we talk a lot about talent in tech. You talk a lot about talent in tech in this conversation. Specifically, when you say talent in tech as part of culture, what does that mean as well? So as specific as you can be. And then Bryan, I'd love for you to weigh in on that as well.
Great, thank you. And so I would say that, first off, I have a ton of respect for the word and notion of culture and how important it is. And I also understand that there's not one single way or input or set of inputs that kind of affect culture, right? It's almost like songwriting, right? You know, how people write songs. You'll see Elton John, you know, just writes he only can write music after Bernie gives him the lyrics, where Led Zeppelin might have done it much differently than the Who and the Beatles. But at the end of the day, they all created great music, right? So there are many different approaches, whether it's run by psychologists or organizational developments or developers or whatever type of expert. My lens, which is informed by my background and my approach as an entrepreneur, is tech and people. And I feel like this is the right time. And I felt like that way before the pandemic. And now I think it's just, you know, been a multiplier of an impact on how we can and should be looking at it, where if we get leadership to witness and buy into driving this change, that alone has an impact on the culture, right? That alone creates efficiencies and effectiveness in the ROI you get from your technologies. That alone helps employee engagement and appreciation, where you're helping them do things better, learn more, and perpetual learning and being productive. So if by holding that lens over, that specific lens over an organization and understand what's holding them back in those areas, I feel has incredible, you know, ripples that impact throughout the organization.
And ultimately, what's the, like, and the goal is what, right? So the transformation that we're making is what? What's the goal?
Let's create more efficiencies and harmony between technology and how the business leverages it. And it starts with your people and communicating and collaborating and productivity. How can we remove the friction in those? And then it emanates out to, you know, your products and services, how you use analytics and automation and machine learning, right? To think about those more sophisticated or advanced approaches to how you do business with some of those, you know, new tools. Like, they can't be just plugged into something that's not at its core healthy, right? Around tech and people. So that's my hypothesis, and we continue to work on improving it and proving it.
Got it. Bryan, what about you from your perspective? What is culture as part of this effort? And how would you define it? How would you, like, and again, specifically, and then what do you see as the opportunity here as we hopefully round the corner with this pandemic thing to improve?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously every company has a culture and they're all unique to themselves. How effective they are at driving that culture as a way they conduct business, that's always called into question. But it's kind of those, it's a family feel of this shared values and goals and the attitudes you take to how you characterize your organization. And I think a lot of people go out of their way to try to find cultures that they would best thrive in. And then when you arrive, you expect to see the day-to-day work happening through that lens. And people get disencouraged or disenfranchised quickly, if not. As an example, I spent a good chunk of my career at Capital One. Very analytical, scientific methodology kind of company, meaning their culture is, if you have a hypothesis and we believe the KPIs around it, go ahead. They actually would celebrate defeat, like, hey, we actually believed it. We went through the science experiment and it failed. Failure's okay. And that was their culture. But you better have a strong hypothesis and an analytical rigor around what you do. And that carried through everything they did. And if an initiative all of a sudden went sideways and it was built on conjecture and didn't have that kind of cultural feel to it, and it was very collaborative. They expected you to collaborate across many different business lines. So the assumption is, hey, you're empowered, and we just assume you are doing those things. To fall out of step with that would have, detrimental impact. And it was a strong culture. I also watched several acquisitions and things start to erode it. So they started buying banks with different cultures, different ways of processing, and you mixed it all, and nobody really kind of brought it home at first. So it was, and you could see the chaos happen. And I actually think the pandemic right now is really heightening that. If you had a strong culture going in, chances are you're probably thriving a bit more as a company unit than if you had a little bit of chaos going on. As we got distributed, it's even challenging more. And we're seeing that with we run a tool called Experience for Square Foot, which diagnoses the human experience. And we'll get into a little of what we see there. But it just starts to showcase where we are, what's happening, and why culture is such a big, important topic. Companies that thrive, you hear all the time, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, that's why. It's, hey, we're all one big family rowing together with a strong culture that can tackle anything. You're as strong as the weakest link versus some bright individuals that get together and wonder why things can't get executed.
No. It's interesting you bring up Capital One. They were a client of mine for a very long time, kind of early on in my after I struck out on my own. I spent 3 years sort of in and out at various levels of that organization. And there is a consistency to that culture in that organization. And it's interesting, the question I was going to ask you, you mentioned this phrase, strong culture, and we're going to get to the assessment tool in just a second here. But and then I was going to ask you kind of what is a strong culture, but kind of having been, like Capital One, I think is a good example of that, simply because I've worked in I've consulted through various business units at various levels, from the executive suite down to individual contributor level. And there is a sense of what it's like to work there. There's a sense of what that community spirit is, how the organization feels about its people. So it's interesting to hear you bring that up.
Like it's simple as, how do you sell your ideas? I always say, sell them through your culture. If it's a highly analytical one, you're going to have to sell it through metrics and opportunities that way. If it's about innovation, it needs to drive in that direction. If it's like a common question I would get as for banking clients, they'd say things like, hey, I want to be like Google. And I'm like, no, you don't. You're heavy regulated. Your culture is all about compliance, rules, regs, and strict adherence for data security and clients, safety reasons. You get into Silicon Valley and there's a lot more experimental, share data across groups. Anyone's got an idea that can impact me. Whole different culture. Whereas if you jumped into a different business unit in a bank, you walk through their floors and sometimes they lock the doors between departments.
Right.
Sometimes they have to, but that's part of the culture, and you got to learn how to navigate it and learn the ropes through it. But if leadership drives that culture home through to its employee base, everyone has kind of a set pathway to get there. And that just makes the whole thing and the whole process easy to start executing ideas.
Before we transition to the next question, just a quick reminder, folks, if you've got questions for Tom, if you've got questions for Bryan, put them in the Q&A box as well. There's already one good question in there already. Just line them up in there, and I'm going to save the last 20, 25 minutes or so of the hour that we have together for those questions and for added discussion as well. And I did put a link in the chat to Tom's book, The Culture Project. So if you're interested, there's a link there that you can grab. Tom, how do you guys know each other? And how has that informed your thinking, the book, et cetera? How did you two meet?
So I talked about owning that business that helped firms relocate and sharing the tech portion of the project. Towards the latter part of before I sold that business, I started seeing, how the need for being more strategic in and around that area. And I put a methodology together to line up leadership's perspective with IT's perspective and the employees at large perspective. And at some point, I think someone in business development that worked for me had reached out to Bryan. Bryan happened to be traveling to New York the next week, and we got together and we immediately clicked. We immediately kind of found like automatic synergies in how he looked at the world, how I looked at the world from each of our own respective perches. And he at Cushman had opportunities to, growing quantities of opportunities to go out and provide workplace assessment services to many of Cushman's clients around North America. Mm-hmm. And Bryan invited me early on to be more of like the tech people productivity, component of that assessment. And we started to do these, one after the other. We did a couple to a few dozen together all over North America, traveling, talking about what we saw time and time again. And we just saw whether sometimes the results were a little bit different or the effects or impacts were a little different, but most often we saw the same types of things getting in the way, almost providing a headwind for a lot of these clients. So it had a tremendous impact on not only my perspective, but also in what I wanted to do and the hunger to kind of help organizations fix it. But it also helped shape a lot of what I bring out in the book. Is what Bryan and I learned a lot together, I would say, during those years doing all that work. And he can talk about his amazing tool that he has developed within Cushman and Wakefield too.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Tom, that we shared right off the bat is the only way you can be successful through a culture is really thinking about people, place, and technology and integrating that concept. So I was in the real estate business. And it was quick to see on client sides when I was working there, just a bunch of silos. Tech group doing their tech things, future things, rolling out real estate building stuff. No one worried about change management, or I'd like to say nobody could talk CFO either. But nobody really rallying around the people and the business and the culture for how we get things done. So our workplace strategy within Cushman always focuses on those three legs of the stool. And the thing I was always inspired by Tom is that he doesn't go in to talk, say, what do you think about your phone system or your computer at your desk? He gets into, well, how do you guys share information? How does the company keep you informed? Yeah. How do you guys meet? Is it easy to meet? How do you share documents? And just get at the heart of, hey, that's what it's like in my shoes when I'm trying to work. And we'll peel that back. And how does the culture kind of wrap all of that? So that's really what we're about, is trying to help businesses solve their business problems. It happens to be through our vocation, but I think too many people are out there just leaning in with the tools and the methods without necessarily understanding what they're trying to solve for the client.
You're right, Bryan. We quickly agreed on discovering the attributes of what was needed to come in and solve their problems, rather than prescribing a fix.
Right. Look, and at the risk of being a tiny bit promotional for an upcoming book, that we've got an upcoming book in the next time, I'm guessing the next 4 to 6 weeks. I'm hoping it's in production now, called Social by Design by Mark Britz and James Tyre. And they argue that their whole thesis is around connecting an organization internally through using social tools. I hesitate to say social networking tools to connect an organization. And they say the same thing. You can't just plug in Yammer or Slack or whatever, and just be like, okay, we're social now. Like, it works, right? The cultural aspects of the organization, the way everybody behaves top down, dictates whether or not the tools actually deliver a connected company, or yet another, message counter I have to check when I get into the office or I get online that day. So we've mentioned it a couple of times now, so I don't want to keep folks in suspense any longer. And then after we cover this part, I want to there's a couple of questions in there in the Q&A box, and I want to switch to those. But Bryan, we've talked a couple of times about the experience per square foot tool. Tell us a little bit about it, why you built it, and what can we share with the folks? I know we have a short poll, so what is that all about?
If you want to pull up, I just have a kind of overview slide, and I want to share some of the data that it's produced that I think people would find interesting. Basically, we set out about 4 or 5 years ago. We really wanted to be able to measure and diagnose the employee experience, and more so just, hey, not just your design of your space, but really a holistic view, thinking through people, place, and technology. And what we really developed was a scientific methodology around actually having analytical rigor, I would say, at the same level of employee engagement surveys around your workplace experience. And it's been really insightful. Nobody had really done regression analytics, factor analysis, and on a lot of data that we have in the workplace. I call them happy face surveys, smiley face. We ask, hey, how important is something? How satisfied are you? But nobody knows. It's not action oriented to the things you want to do. So we honed in on developing this tool that can really measure you regardless where you work. So if it's at home, at work, third places, and we've got things that canvas technology, social issues, networking issues, cultural issues, the design of places in there, even how you service people or the impacts of location. And I always find it interesting, like out of 40 different categories, maybe 20 to 25% are actually making an impact on people. And that's time and again. And you see the data on the left. It's 100 countries, hundreds of companies. And it's pretty consistent that there's really only 8 to 10 of things that of those 40, you don't know which ones they are. They impact your culture and your people's effectiveness. And half of them on average are struggling. They got some challenges. So really having a tool that provides really the power of the voice of the employee in their hands for the first time to say, hey, I see what's going on and I can see how we can fix it. If you I've got a couple quick polling questions I thought would be interesting.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
And they're actually questions right out of our survey.
Yeah, give me just a second and I will.
I put you on the spot.
No, not at all. It's like manning the controls here. It's a lot going on. But yeah, we do have a poll. Yeah.
Jeff, as you hear what Bryan's tool does, think of the power of this tool, right? Ahead of, an approach like mine to go in and address these, these areas, right? Yeah. This lending credibility or tangible evidence of the impact of the culture present day, right? How powerful that can be to illustrate to a leader it's time to invest and get behind.
What's really nice is if you go in, and we get over 60% participation on these, you go into the C-suite and say, here are the issues your people are stating. And instead, I used to get the visceral reaction of, that's not true. Now they kind of shake their heads and go, yeah, I thought that. No. They don't question the data. And really people getting a voice to help influence leaders to know, hey, are you doing a good job? Are we thriving right now? What are the issues? And a lot of it helping shape just how we were going to return and get back to the office.
Got it. I got the poll ready to go. I'm going to launch it. There are 2 questions in the poll. And what we learned in yesterday's webinar is that if you don't answer both questions, it won't let you submit the poll. So just FYI, there are 2 questions. The poll is up and running at this point. So go ahead and feel free to vote. We got 2 of the 5 questions from Bryan's survey in there. And give us a chance to get a sense of how the folks on the call are reacting to this. Maybe spend a minute waiting for you to vote. Excellent.
Do we see these real time, or do they pop up at the end?
I see it in real time. Do you see it in real time?
I do not.
Oh yeah, that's one of the benefits of being the host is I see the little lines move. So we've got about 75% of the folks who have voted. I'll give it another 30 seconds or so. If you're still voting, go ahead and do it now, and
we'll see if the data supports. What we traditionally see from companies, if you ask people, hey, what do you think of your company culture? We get high marks. People are really feeling good. In fact, during the pandemic, it's been great. They actually think companies are keeping them informed and they're reaching out and doing these things. But when you turn around and say, so how are you feeling connected to the company culture? It nosedives. People personally aren't feeling connected. So I'm curious.
So here are the results.
Yeah, so we see the majority in the agree, somewhat agree, and strongly agree. So everyone there except for one around liking company culture. So we got a bit more disagrees and a little heavier weighting with somewhat agree. Not a big sample size here, but it's a consistent message we see. We get a lot more people starting to show up, disagree, strongly disagree with their own connections. And that's really insightful. Clients generally don't know that. They think they're doing a good job. In fact, somebody told me, Tom and I were on the phone, and they said, you know what, we wouldn't need change management if leaders did a great job of managing their culture. Change management's necessary when the people don't understand what the top of the house is doing. If you want to flip to the next slide, I'll just show you at a high level some of the results we've been seeing that I think helps drive why we're here today talking about culture.
Yep.
So what you're going to see is just a headline view, and this is 60,000 people across 100 countries have given us like 3 million data points. And these are kind of the headlines through the last year when everybody was working from home. I focused on the big red numbers. Those represent on a 7-point Likert scale that goes strongly agree, strongly disagree. How many people are choosing agree, strongly to agree with whatever I'm asking them? So right off the bat, 75% say agree or strongly agree that they're still productive. And this actually is consistent with pre-pandemic numbers. So we didn't lose our sense of productivity. That was the biggest fear, that there'd just be this big drop. Nope, that was fine. But it's these other numbers that just drove concern. So only half of us are feeling connected these days. We're not learning as much. We're not connected to our company culture. We're not socializing. Meetings tend to be about projects. And that number was 73% prior to the pandemic. 74% of people had a sense of well-being. Now it's only 55%. We all know work-life blur. 72% have challenges working from home. So we thought older generations would struggle, but the younger ones just have logistical challenges with having setups. Kids are home from school, a lot going on. But despite all that noise, if you look on the right, almost 4 out of 5 people, 78% said, you know what, we should do more of this. We should extend our flexibility in working from home policies. And that doesn't mean working from home every day, but that's kind of a new normal. I have a lot of clients that didn't really even allow it, and now they're realizing that's probably the new way forward. If you flip ahead, I just got a couple other slides that showcase some of the issues that I tend to worry about. There are drivers why people want to work remote. There is a high level of trust, 90% folks feeling trusted, 82% feeling the companies are keeping them informed, I'm still productive, so therefore, let's expand and do this more. But opening the office is really important because our well-being is suffering. Learning is really down. It's formal training. There's no mentoring going on. If you think about the junior talent out there, or people who joined a firm because they wanted to learn the ropes in your company, that's almost gone to nothing. Only half of us, 56%, are feeling connected. And I drew a line around this. Only 50%, only half of the people working out there have this sense of connection to company culture. And if you lose that, it's hard to retain people, never mind attract them. And this was much higher prior to that. And it's a real challenge for us that we know how to get a culture going within a work environment. You know, we've seen lots of places that do wonderful jobs. I look at office as a manifestation of your culture. You bring people together, you rally them. It's why we have yearly summits. They're all challenged and faced right now. How do I do this virtually? And virtually is here to stay. So that's a big issue. And on the last slide I have after this, I've had repeat clients coming through, and 6 months later, they took it early on, they came back and took it again. We see some small improvements on doing better jobs, working out home conditions, but on the right, further drops, double-digit drops on feeling connected to culture or bonding and learning from each other. So it's going down faster now. And for the first time, as we turn the corner into this new year, we're starting to see clients' productivity start to dip. So I think these eroding cultural impacts are starting to wear on just company success. So when Tom's book came out, I jumped on the notion of we got to help people figure out how to rejigger and get the energy back into this cultural topic. They don't know how to do it, and the time's right to really rally around this, because to me, this is the linchpin for how you survive coming out of it.
Got it.
If you think about this dimension, or what this output is, employees reacting to what they've been exposed to or given, right? What they're, left to work with, for, and through. So think of the challenges Bryan mentioned earlier. Pre-pandemic, people were all over the map, but if you worked for a company that was more progressive with flexible working and working from home kind of stuff, they might have been a little bit more well equipped, but many to most organizations were not ready for that, right? So it was all about, literally clients going in the back room and finding old laptops and devices to ship out to people, right? To image and shoot out. Now you have all these people learning to work that way. They're connecting differently. They might have a different view into what they work with, what the data and their knowledge exposure has completely changed. And now on top of that, everyone's worried about security, right? So most firms would react urgently with a Zoom subscription, a massive Zoom subscription. If you don't believe me, go check Zoom stock, right? And that might have helped put a piece of gum on the hole in the rowboat, but at the end of the day, how we're tracking towards getting back to work, that's not the answer, right? So what Bryan and I are really talking about is helping clients settle down for a second and take 30 days or a little bit more and say, where's the puck going a little bit, right? And how do we now make investments and train people and open our culture to where we're going as an organization, not just getting back to work by Labor Day of 2021, but what are our policies going to be in 2022 and beyond?
Yeah.
I think there's a aspect of culture is what happens before and after the meeting. And right now we're just in the meetings. Because I joke that the thing I hear from people, sorry, I'm late. And the last thing I hear is I have to jump to another meeting. Yeah. So the culture is not happening in between meetings. And that is the very thread and fabric of what has made us successful. Or talk to people who have joined companies during the pandemic. Try to onboard. They still have no idea what the culture is. They've not met anyone. They've not been in your space. If you can solve that for them and make this whole kind of cultural cohesion happen, I, I think you've got a wild success in front of you. But if you avoid this, all the tactics of, hey, it's healthy environment, safe distancing, we'll do all of that. That's logistics.
Yeah.
People didn't come work to you because you have the best logistics. To me, if it's fun after the meeting and we're thriving to do things in our culture and we bring it to the next meeting, we're high-fiving, you keep going. But I'm not seeing that these days. Stress levels are really high.
You mean elbowing?
Yeah.
Not high-fiving. Sorry.
Elbowing, yes. I want to jump into user in some of the listener questions, some viewer questions. There's 3 good ones in there. One thing and before we do that, just one thing that came into my mind as we were talking a little bit was about as we transition back, as we try to figure out this new way, what can we learn? And I know that certainly Cushman tends to work with larger organizations and enterprises, but what can we learn from companies that have been all remote their entire existence? And look, there isn't one that comes to mind immediately. I mean, all of them are right now, right? But there are companies that have been doing this from their birth. Now, the biggest one that I can think of off the top of my head, I think is Automatic, the parent company for WordPress. Right, they have a couple thousand employees, and they've been fully distributed their entire life. I mean, is there something to learn from these companies about how to create a cohesive culture when we are distributed?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what we see there is they know how to leverage the tools and technology. They know how to stay engaged beyond just the project in the meeting, because that's what they've always done. And you learn how to bond and unite that way. Let's face it, we all got thrown into the frying pan on this one. There was no change management.
Yeah.
You may not even have gotten the memo or had a setup at home. I have countless of clients who actually, and I say this all the time, there's one thing about returning to office, but you got to take care of what's broken in the home front. Like, hey, I had 2 monitors, an ergonomic chair, and all of this. You don't know what I'm working on. It could be a kitchen table off my laptop. But I think, and what we've seen is, I look more at groups that are not used to this. So as an example, there are certain types of functionality in departments that are really struggling and others that are thriving that we've seen in our data. So if you're a salesperson, you're a creative innovator, you're a people focused like an HR group, those people are really challenging right now. Hey, I did this all in the office. I was around my peeps. We did this day to day, face to face, and you took it away. I've got some infrastructure groups. So I'm talking marketing, legal, finance, IT. We sent them home and they're like, yeah, okay. I was leveraging tools. I had a lot of heads down work. It was effective. I think the challenge that I see for companies is we focus a lot on individuals and safety and preference and choice, but how does the business come together to work? So if I was all in the office, face to face and thriving, and now I have, say my sales and R&D function comes back because they're really struggling, but I leave the other guys home. Well, these guys expect everyone to come back. And well, what is that model? I'm staying virtual, I'm coming in. You've got now to fix it. So really, it's not, do I have the magic answer? Does Tom? No. What he's offering is 30 days to actually go through the process, hammer that out so that by the time people come back, you know what organism is the future.
And Jeff, just to key on a couple of things Bryan said, many of his clients, Cushman's clients, are working to reevaluate their real estate strategy, right? In some cases, it might be, reduce the footprint, and I think where Bryan was going is using the workplace maybe a little bit differently than how certain organizations were in the past, right? More hospitality, more, this is where we gather and meet in person. At the same time, you could be saving money there at your corporate headquarters and how much square footage you took, right? What are you going to do with that money, And some of the things that Bryan just brought up on the devices, people at home. I know certain companies, and I think this lends to what you were asking before, companies who are doing this pre-pandemic a little bit more or better than others is they said, you know, I don't know how automatic is, but I'm guessing they had, you know, a smaller need for real estate if it was decentralized, right? Yeah. So that line item of the budget is drastically different, right? Let's take some of that savings and let's go around. So I've worked with some clients where they're going around and helping perform assessments on home offices, right? And coming up with some sort of stipend that contributes to the ergonomic chair or the second monitor, or a way to accommodate their employees' engagement and connectivity at home to help, right? So let's put some of that savings, if we capture it somewhere, back in to support productivity and employee engagement. So I think more and more businesses are capturing those newer ways to look at how to, you know, get people to be productive and connected and collaborating.
Got it. Cool.
Well, I see in the comments, and thanks, Jan, around social cohesion is the highest predictor of team productivity. I would say old school, that social cohesion happened in person. In fact, our data says 2/3 of the folks answering our survey said they came to work every day. Going forward, we're only seeing that as 25%. So as Tom's talking about people and technology, that's what's going to enable social cohesion. So your question on companies that have always worked from home, the collaborative technology is actually better when we're all working from home. We've seen productivity go up 10% in better collaboration. I actually have one client, they sent some people back to the office and their dusty monitor video conferencing with the taped on camera on the top. Yeah. They use conference rooms and open up their Zoom on their laptop because people are still at home.
Right.
Because that's so much more effective than trying to use this thing. And Tom's pointing out, well, this thing is the rollout of unsuccessful technology initiatives in the past. So how are we going to overcome that? Because the people who do go back need to collaborate and have that social cohesion as effective as it is right now. And I think that's a huge challenge. And that's what's really going to enable it. The office, yeah, it has to be reshaped and all of that. But with more and more people, we've got 25% as our predictor of who's going to stay home, 25% coming in, and about half of the workforce being this hybrid role, bouncing back and forth. Well, that's 75% of people that are going to need technology who aren't in every day to be effective.
Right. So we've got a few viewer questions. We've got about 6 minutes left in the hour. Let's see if we can get through a couple of these, and then I can share the rest with you, and you can respond to the folks directly. So first question says, Tom and Bryan, hey guys, what are your recommendations for effective mixed mode meetings with some participants in person and other remote? How can groups navigate the technology connection tax when one person physically in the room has to ensure that Zoom, Teams, et cetera, is up and going?
Well, that is improving greatly. The get it going tax, I think, is what the question might have referenced. But beyond that, if you think pre-pandemic, a lot of companies were stuck with making it work in the physical workplace and then being able to join from out of the office or remote working, right? And now, to Bryan's point, we're collaborating well because everybody's out of the office, right? So you can subscribe to Zoom per se, and everybody's on equal footing. Getting back, what I see developing is things like Slack, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with Salesforce. But what I see where I see a lot of momentum that's going to be a game changer is in and around something like Microsoft Teams, right? We don't yet understand what the power of something like Teams that is so embedded in the office, out of the office, and this, everything from how you share data, how you collaborate, it's all being kind of put into one pipe, right? And it's going to be less about email. And Google is doing some wonderful things too in that way, where you kind of have this one set of optics to look into everything that's being brought together, right? And so I would challenge people to look at it as if it doesn't matter where you are, and that includes how you get it started and how you engage.
Yeah, I would say the biggest opportunity in what we've witnessed is there's so much power when I have it all on my desktop or in my handheld device. So I think the biggest change I anticipate is right now when you go into these conference rooms and offices, you got to start touching other devices, phones on tables, connectivity to screens. I think the power has to be, it's on my desktop. That's why Teams, that's why Zoom, that's why all these are effective. It's just point and click and I'm on. So I enter a room, that has to be automatically within my desktop on my computer, and I make all my connections there. The minute I have to leave my environment, I get confused. And one of the number one drivers of employee experience is easy to use collaborative technology, and it's one of the worst scoring within the workplace for that reason. Even within my own company, the rules in San Francisco are different than Chicago, are different than New York. It's more consistent, but it's not always the same. Or you have guests come in, how many people come in with an Apple device and my VGA connection doesn't fit.
And that's culture. That's culture. So we're not talking about only the IT domain, coordinating between IT and HR and learning and all that. What Brian's referencing is geography, where, people are making decisions for one segment of the workforce that's located in and around New York versus San Francisco versus, Chicago.
And it's that user experience. If I can access data, I can access your technology, and I can do my whole job off of my desktop here, I'm empowered. And I think that's kind of the learning of how empowered people are working from home. And that's got to carry through into how we interact with technology in the building. And that's got a ways to go. So we don't have the answers, but we have this time between now and whatever that return is, down the path, down the road to get that resolved.
Can we get another question in, Jeff?
Let's try to squeeze one more in there, Tom, and this one's directly about the book. So to you, I'm guessing it says in the book you talk about forming a strike force. Can you talk a little bit about how to form an informal strike force if you're not in a position of direct leadership? We just got about a minute left.
Yeah, I would say, so for me, in the book, I use the strike force as a way to go out and get people who are capable of maintaining their day job and kind of compartmentalize those special pockets of time where you can work on improving and making things better. And that's not easy. Not everyone can do that, right? Depending on their role and how they approach their role. But if finding people who have ideas and goals around making things better and who, kind of show the empathy to teach others. Like Brian, how many times did we see, we'd always go in and we talk to these different groups, and there was always one or two people who were overtaxed being with the unofficial person who helped people use a program or understand how to use it, right? So that person has the right mindset. They would just tend to get overwhelmed. People would take advantage of it, including the company. Right? But going around and finding ways to build a strike force with people who have a voice but don't have a way to express it, or who bring attributes, bringing a millennial into a conversation who thinks a little bit differently about technology than maybe someone of a different generation. How do we leverage that to learn and see things that are right in front of us sometimes and bring them together and kind of propagate within our team, our group, or our department to make things better? That's where you start, and knowing that everybody has a role in making the culture better. Everybody.
Got it. And on that inspiring note, we are out of time. So that was good. Everyone's got a role in making a better culture. That's fantastic. So Tom and Bryan, first of all, thank you very much for an interesting and exciting discussion. Thanks for being here. Folks, thanks for showing up and tuning in. As I mentioned earlier, Tom's book is available. I put the link in the chat a couple of times on anywhere you buy books online. And then the video of this will be up on the Sense and Respond YouTube channel within a week or less, depending on how the weekend goes. Otherwise,
there's a giveaway.
There is a giveaway. Thanks for reminding me. I totally forgot. So the giveaway is going to happen after the fact. Tom's going to make a decision on who won the free copies of the book, as well as the session, and we will be emailing that person directly after the fact. And so keep an eye out on your email for that. Otherwise, folks, take care of yourselves and see you at the next Sense and Respond Press.
See you at the office.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.